It's Halloween time, and you know what that means. We're looking at spooky games. And if there's one thing the myriad of indie horror games from the past 10 or so years have taught us, it's that low-fidelity graphics are a great way to generate tension and fear. This was actually a point brought up by Shannon Strucci and Harry Brewis' Scanline episode on the power of VHS.
Let's think about VHS again. That awful, tiny resolution, flickery screen, even pure blackness is off-kilter. If you walked into a room with this playing, you might even think you're watching a scene of something hiding in darkness. I bet you can almost make out a figure hidden there in all the noise. You see where I'm going with this now, don't you? The flickers and noise in the darkness were easily confused for glimpses of the monster. Even when you were sure nothing was there, you could never really be sure.
And the point translates perfectly well to video games. It's so much more scary to have players visualize the details of a scene in their minds without showing anything, to let players picture what lurks just outside of the frame, to let their imaginations create monsters in the chunky compression, blurry encoding, pixelated low resolution, or other low fidelity image artifacts. Hence the predominance of retro, VHS, and distorted aesthetics in video game horror. But one aesthetic you don't see too much of is the one employed by today's game, the itch.io cult hit Faith. Released by Airdorf Games in 2017, Faith definitely knows the power of only showing what you need and letting players' imaginations fill in the rest. But unlike most other horror games that use those tricks, it's visually influenced by the games of the early days of MS-DOS and the Apple II. This poses a challenge to a game looking to offer a frighteningly spooky time. It isn't just a retro or a lo-fi aesthetic like Lone Survivor or Paratopic. The aesthetic it's borrowing from tends to have an extremely limited color palette, and Faith itself seems to have settled somewhere around 8 colors total. The low resolution means that sprites are particularly large, and combined with that low color count means that the environments are fairly sparsely populated. Can an Atari-level forest really be all that scary? Well, it turns out, yeah. One of the first tricks the game has up its sleeve to make the lo-fi aesthetic work is a voice synthesizer. You actually run into it upon launching the game. It's one of the first things the game throws at you.
September 21st, 1987. It's been 1 year since I first went inside that house. I have to finish what I started.
And the sound is chunky and distorted with unnatural starts and stops on different phonemes. It's grating on the ears while emotionally flat and distant. And the game uses it sparingly enough that the crunchy, digitized voice is jarring whenever it comes up. The game proper opens as the player character, John Ward, arrives at an abandoned house deep in the Connecticut woods to finish what he started 1 year ago. And though what that is isn't exactly clear yet, the fact that he said his actions aren't approved by the Vatican, and the fact that his white clerical collar is the only identifiable piece of clothing on him in a horror game, kind of make it obvious what you're walking into. As John explores the forested pathway up to his destination, you'll run into various objects that you can bless the demons out of. When the demons disappear, they'll drop a little note for John to pick up and read, giving the player more context into the goings-on of the world they find themselves in. Lore-dumpy logs are hardly original or even ideal under most circumstances, but they do make a degree of sense here, at least from a design perspective. They enable the game to overcome a lot of environmental storytelling that it simply couldn't do with its chosen aesthetic, and also allow the introduction of characters that couldn't exist otherwise, either because they'd ruin the desolate, solitary mood, or, more often, because they're already dead. Still, it is a profoundly goofy take on not just found audio logs, but on religion and Catholic ritual in particular, as though all it takes is waving across at stuff to cast demons out. But as you explore the woods, you will also randomly run into a more directly spooky monster, a white creature that scrambles through the underbrush on all fours. Like the ski-free snow monster before it, it will enter the screen from a random side and charge directly at you. If you're quick and brave, you can pull out your cross and confront it, sending it skittering back into the wilds. But if you don't... Wow, that looks cool and creepy. We'll come back to that in a second. Anyways, eventually John makes it into the house, and the tone of the game shifts from creepy woods to ominously quiet domesticity. You learn that the house belonged to the Martins, their daughter Amy, and their twin sons, Nate and Jason. And you learn that, yes, John was there last year to help perform an exorcism on Amy Martin, the eldest daughter of the Martin family. However, things went sideways, and Amy's parents and the priest you were assisting were all killed. John fled, leaving a possessed Amy alone in the house. And the silence as you explore the now abandoned house works wonders. Having just escaped whatever that thing was outside, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. The tension is palpable, and the creepiness of those scenes is wonderful, whether it's the twins' bedroom with toys scattered everywhere, the bathroom that is perfectly still except for the dripping of water into the tub, or the basement room that's lined with the traditional array of horror movie mannequins. At all points, a scene from a horror movie threatens to pop out, and you're just waiting. That's another trick the game uses, actually. Faith leans into genre trappings in order to invoke iconography that's pretty well known. Derelict houses in the woods are a horror staple, but so too are the exorcisms, possessions, satanic cults, nightmare visions, and demonic clashes with the clergy that the game ultimately deploys. It evokes The Conjuring and The Evil Dead, and above all, The Exorcist. Not in a lazy rip-off way, but in a way that allows its minimalist graphics to convey the scenes these sorts of films are expected to have. Because the game is invoking archetypes, the graphics have to do that much less world building, and you can fill the horror bits in yourself without having to conjure too many specifics in your head. We know what the dimly lit room full of toys looks like in a horror movie. We know what it means to have a room full of mannequins while a killer lurks. So the game just has to gesture towards those ideas. Anyway, you make your way through the basement and discover a small altar, with candles still lit and patterns drawn in what you presume to be blood. Suddenly, icons start marching towards you, satanic symbols, footsteps, and you raise your cross in self-defense, pushing back against the evil until suddenly...
She is here.
I love that bit. And really, these little clips are the game's ace in the hole, because Faith knows it's not enough to just hide the monsters in shadow, to only obscure the terrifying things that go bump in the night by making them pixely and basic. Sometimes, actual glimpses of the terror are necessary to make them seem real, threatening, or grounded. After all, you can only jump at shadows when you know something could actually lurk there. And to achieve this, the game partially breaks with its otherwise really consistent aesthetic. A low-fidelity game from the 1980s suddenly switches to rotoscoped animation that keeps the limited color palette, but has a fluidity of movement that is utterly disjointed from everything else in the game. Like, this is a game where John Ward walking has 2 animation frames, and suddenly this. Like its creepy voiceover work, Faith takes something analog and crunches it up into an unnatural digital form, at once too fluid and detailed in its movement, yet too low fidelity to really make out. And like its voiceover work, it tries to limit how often it leans on the trick. It doesn't want to imply the whole game would be like this if it could. It uses this to express a sort of grounded horror, to punctuate important moments and shocking reveals. Grotesqueries that first appear on screen as goofy ski-free monsters become crawling demons. Lo-fi pictures of little girls with her parents suddenly invoke The Ring. From this point on, though, Faith becomes less interested in atmosphere and more game-y. The possessed Amy will charge at you invisibly in various rooms, requiring you to raise your cross in self-defense. Then she'll surround you and give you only a limited amount of time to find the true Amy before... Eventually, after you've cleared the house of Amy's spirit, you hear a door unlock upstairs. The attic awaits. Here you have a final showdown with the spirit possessing Amy Martin's body. This is probably the weakest part of the game. It's not particularly scary, thematically resonant, or fun to hold a cross up in different directions while avoiding a monster with insta-kill touch. But just when you think you've bested the demon, it pulls another trick from the Exorcist playbook and throws itself out the window. You make your way downstairs and find a gun with a single bullet in the entryway of the house, with "Kill her" written backwards in blood. Hello, The Shining. From here, the path of the story is up to you. There are 5 endings, each depending on who and what you choose to shoot once you leave the house. Most of them are tragic in one way or another, and each concludes with a write-up about what happened in the woods in Connecticut one dark night late in September. But I'll leave discovering those up to you. Faith isn't particularly deep. It's a pastiche of tropes and ideas sewn together from elsewhere. That goes both for the iconography it liberally borrows from pop culture, and its mix of atmospheric, action-y, and choose-your-own-adventure narrative gameplay. But I also get why it's so appealing. It has a unique hook in that rotoscoped horror, and even if bits are clunky, it's effective at delivering the scares and tone it sets out to give you. It's cheap and short and knows how to achieve exactly what it sets out to do, kinda like John Carpenter's Halloween. And if Faith is a perennial classic like Halloween, then Faith Chapter 2, released earlier this year, is kinda like Halloween 2. There's more of everything. More characters, more environments, more scary murders, more disturbing rotoscope bits, more action sequences, and a lot more lore and world building. It's not bad, but where the first one felt lean and focused, the second one feels maybe like it's got too many plates spinning. We meet another priest, Father Garcia, who is tending to a young boy who is also afflicted with demonic possession. It turns out the boy, Michael, is actually the Chupacabra monster from the original game, escaped from Father Garcia's house as he tries to perform an exorcism on the child and learn the name of the demon worshipped by the cult that was only really loosely implied in the first game. Here they're now bumped up to primary antagonists, and protagonist John Ward finds himself chasing them down in graveyards, abandoned churches, and sewer-based hideouts in order to get vengeance on what they did to little Amy Martin. And John is no longer really a regretful soul who failed a young girl and wants to make it right 1 year later, but a grizzled failure who has nothing left but an awkward mix of faith and vengeance. Kind of. See, another thing that got bumped up in the sequel is the question of John Ward's sanity. This was kind of left ambiguous in the first game. He spent some time in a psych ward after the first attempt at an exorcism left him the only survivor, and several of the endings were newspaper stories that suggested not only did the Vatican disavow Ward, but denied he was ever a priest to begin with. But the idea that Ward may himself be insane only really becomes a major part of the text in Chapter 2, where the demons start bringing it up and taunting him with it.
I am sorry for these and my past sins. Thou hast said will. Here is thy penance. Bring the child to me. Give thanks to the Lord for his good. For his mercy endures forever.
Faith Chapter 2's real problem is that it borrows too much from the middle of the original game, focusing on boss fights and gameplay-driven action sequences with insta-kill fail states. There's certainly more to do, and the act of playing it feels less aimless and wandery and more directed, but it comes at the expense of quiet, small-scale creepiness. It's all flashy, gory rotoscope deaths and tricky environmental gameplay gimmicks. Always shocking, but never as unnerving as, say, walking in silence next to some covered mannequins, or being lost in the woods with the possibility that Chupacabra could show up. Also, and this is maybe a personal pet peeve, but I really struggle with the name of the satanic cult leader and mastermind puppeteer behind all of this loss of life being just named Gary. It's not a scary name. That's not to say the second game fails at being spooky, it's just that when it does it in a big, bombastic way. My favorite bit is the newspaper clipping towards the end of the game. It implies 3 individuals you saw in a cemetery at the beginning were ritualistically killed. It then goes on to say that authorities think it may be related to the slaying of Amy Martin the previous week by one John Ward when he pretended to be a priest and lured her into the woods to her demise. But it's okay because those 3 were ungodly heathens. That's what you want them to think, isn't it? Really, you were just doing the community a favor, cleaning up the trash, getting high in a cemetery. They got what was coming to them, and now they're dead. But you can't kill me, because you can't kill what can never die. You can't kill me. Pandemonium regnat satani vitae! Pandemonium regnat satani vitae! And that's what scared the crap out of me. At the apex of this satanic screed, something reached out and started moving things around in my room, and it totally got me. My controller, which I had completely forgotten I had plugged in, I was playing with the keyboard, started vibrating on my desk. Neither game had used vibration up until that point, and it totally shocked me. For that reason alone, I have fond memories of this game. Really, both titles are good Halloween fun in their own way. I still prefer the quiet, creeping terror of the first game to the more in-your-face shocks of the second, but they're both perfectly enjoyable little nightmares. And the Faith series will continue. Airdorf Games have dropped a number of screenshots that imply the third chapter is going to be set in a tower, and the ending of Faith Chapter 2 suggests that it'll involve Amy Martin's twin siblings, Nate and Jason. Whether John Ward will defeat Malphus and his puppet master Gary, whether he'll renounce the cross or keep his faith, and whether he's just imagining all of this or truly fighting for the light against the forces of darkness, all remain to be seen. But whatever answers and rotoscoped horrors await, here's hoping they're as enjoyably spooky as the first two.
Dios mío, what have you done?